Story 1. Flight 417. Death in the Sky. On a cold December night, Pearson International Airport was bustling with travelers eager to reach their destinations. The clock struck 10 p.m., and the sky was thick with ominous clouds, hinting at an approaching storm. At Gate 17, passengers of Flight 417 to New York gathered, unaware that for some of them, this would be their final journey. Among them was Adam Khalil, a university student in his early 20s, heading home for the holidays after his exams. He sat in the waiting lounge, sipping his coffee and glancing at his phone, surrounded by strangers engaged in their own worlds. Yet, an inexplicable sense of unease gripped him, a vision of death. When the boarding call echoed through the terminal, the passengers slowly made their way onto the plane. As Adam stepped inside, an overwhelming dread washed over him. Something felt wrong. The aircraft's engines hummed a little too roughly. The air inside was thick and suffocating. He shook off the feeling, took his seat by the window, and fastened his seatbelt, trying to calm his nerves. And then, a searing pain shot through his head, his vision blurred, and suddenly, he saw it. The plane had taken off smoothly, but 30 minutes into the flight, chaos erupted. The aircraft shook violently, plummeting mid-air. Screams filled the cabin as oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Overhead, compartments burst open, sending luggage flying. The pilot struggled for control, but then, one of the engines exploded into flames. The fuselage cracked open, and passengers were sucked out into the abyss. Then, an explosion, a blinding light. The plane disintegrated mid-air, fire, screams, darkness. And then, Adam gasped, eyes wide in terror. He was still in his seat. The flight hadn't taken off yet. Escaping fate. His pulse pounded in his ears. He glanced around. The passengers were calm, oblivious to the horror he had just witnessed. It wasn't a dream. It was a premonition. "We have to get off this plane," Adam yelled, unbuckling his seatbelt. Heads turned. A flight attendant approached with a concerned expression. "Sir, please remain seated." But Adam refused. He bolted up, panic consuming him. "The plane is going to crash. We need to get out now." Whispers spread among the passengers. Some laughed nervously, but others, like a businessman named Marcus, a pregnant woman named Rebecca, and a young woman named Lena, looked hesitant. Security was called to remove Adam. After a brief struggle, he was escorted off the plane, along with 5 others who chose to follow him. The doors closed. The plane taxied to the runway. The disaster unfolds. Adam sat in the terminal, eyes fixed on the flight status screen. His hands trembled as he checked the time. 20 minutes after takeoff. 30 minutes. Then, a breaking news alert flashed on the airport's TV screens. "Breaking news. Flight 417 has crashed. No survivors." Silence filled the terminal. Adam felt his world tilt. He was right. The plane had exploded, just as he had seen in his vision. Beside him, Rebecca sobbed. Marcus sat in stunned silence. Lena clutched her face, shaking. But the nightmare was far from over. Death hunts, the survivors' days passed. Then, the deaths began. The first to die was Marcus. He slipped down a flight of stairs at home, breaking his neck, but the gruesome detail? His head landed perfectly on a protruding nail, impaling his skull. Next was Rebecca. She was taking a bath when the power flickered. The bathroom lights went out. Panicked, she tried to step out, but slipped. Her head struck the faucet. Moments later, an electrical surge from the water heater sent thousands of volts coursing through her body, electrocuting her to death. Then came Lena's turn. She was at the train station when her phone slipped onto the tracks. As she bent to retrieve it, her jacket caught on a railing. The oncoming train didn't stop. She was dragged under in a split second. The inevitable end. Adam was the last survivor. He knew he was next. One night, while driving on a deserted highway, he noticed a large truck ahead, carrying massive logs. A chilling déjà vu gripped him. Final destination, the log truck scene. He changed lanes, attempting to overtake, but then one of the ropes snapped. A giant log came loose, rolling straight toward his car. He had no time to react. The impact was instant. His car was obliterated, his body torn apart in the wreckage. They found him 2 days later. Was it fate? Or does death never let you escape? Story 2. The Carnival of Death. A Final Destination. Horror story warning. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest terrifying stories. The Night of Thrills. The carnival had arrived in town. Bright lights flashed, music played, and the smell of popcorn and cotton candy filled the air. It was the kind of place where people came to forget their worries and indulge in fun. For Adam Khalil and his group of friends, Liam, Sarah, Rachel, and Kevin, this was the perfect way to spend the weekend. They had planned this night for weeks, eager to experience the Twister, the largest and most terrifying roller coaster in the state. "Dude, this ride is insane. 5 loops, a vertical drop, and it hits 90 miles per hour, Kevin exclaimed, hyping up the group. "You scared, Adam?" Rachel teased. Adam smirked, but deep down, something felt off. He glanced at the massive steel structure of the Twister, its towering frame illuminated by neon lights. The cars roared overhead, full of screaming thrill-seekers. As they reached the ride's entrance, Adam's stomach twisted into knots. A vision of terror. They fastened their harnesses, and the ride attendants made their final safety checks. The operator pulled the lever, and the ride lurched forward. Then, a sharp pain shot through Adam's skull. His vision blurred, and suddenly, he wasn't in the ride anymore. He saw it happen. The coaster climbed to its highest peak, but instead of smoothly descending, a metal bolt snapped loose. The front car detached, sending passengers hurling through the air. The following cars derailed, crashing into the steel beams, splitting bodies in half. A massive explosion ignited as the electrical system short-circuited, and the entire structure collapsed, burying everyone beneath a mountain of fire and twisted metal. Screams, blood, death. Then, Adam gasped, his eyes darting around. He was still on the ride. It hadn't started yet. Breaking the cycle heart pounding, Adam ripped off his harness. "Stop the ride!" he shouted. People turned to stare. The ride operator frowned. "Sir, sit back down, or you'll have to leave." But Adam refused. "It's going to crash. We have to get out now." His panic spread like wildfire. Sarah and Rachel exchanged nervous glances. Kevin, always skeptical, scoffed, but Liam looked genuinely freaked out. "I think we should go," Liam muttered. The operator, now frustrated, forced Adam off the ride, along with Liam, Sarah, Rachel, and a couple of others who hesitated after seeing the commotion. As Adam and his group stood outside the ride's gates, trying to catch their breath, a horrific screech filled the air. Then, bam! A massive explosion tore through the carnival. The Twister had collapsed, just as Adam had seen in his vision. Screams echoed. Debris rained down, the air filled with the smell of smoke and burnt flesh. People were running, crying, calling for help. Adam and his friends stood frozen. They had survived. But at what cost? The grim fate begins. Over the next few days, the nightmare only worsened. One by one, the survivors of the Twister accident died in horrifying ways. The first to go was Kevin. While working on his car, the jack stand slipped, crushing him beneath the vehicle. But what was eerie? The wrench he had been holding landed perfectly across the battery terminals, sparking a fire that engulfed him alive. Next was Rachel. She was at the gym when a cable snapped from a weight machine. The metal bar slammed into her skull, crushing it instantly. Sarah died a week later. She had just finished swimming at the local pool. As she climbed out, the lifeguard accidentally turned on the pool drain at maximum power. Sarah's hair got sucked in, trapping her. She struggled, kicking and clawing, but couldn't break free. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. Liam was next. While working late at his office, a freak elevator malfunction caused the doors to close too soon. His arm was caught, and as he screamed for help, the elevator descended. His body was ripped apart in a gruesome instant. Nowhere left to run. Adam was the last one standing. He knew death was coming. One night, desperate to escape his fate, he drove to an empty road far from the city. No distractions, no dangers, but death finds you anywhere. As he sped down the highway, headlights suddenly blinded him. A truck swerved into his lane. Adam yanked the wheel, skidding across the asphalt. His car spun, and then crash. A metal pole pierced through his windshield, impaling him straight through the chest. His vision blurred. Blood filled his mouth, and then darkness. No one cheats death, not for long. Story 3. The Curse of the Subway. A normal commute, or so they thought. The subway was packed, as always. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, coffee, and damp metal. The sounds of shuffling feet, distant conversations, and the occasional screech of the train filled the underground station. It was 8:42 a.m., rush hour in New York City, and Ayad Khalil stood among the crowd, waiting for his train to arrive. He had taken this route every morning for the past 2 years. It was routine, boring, predictable. Today, however, something felt wrong. As he checked the time on his phone, a strange sense of dread washed over him. His stomach twisted, his skin tingled. A sudden gust of wind blew through the tunnel, carrying with it the scent of burnt metal and something rotten. Then, the subway lights flickered, and suddenly, a vision of death. Ayad's head pounded, his vision blurred, and then he wasn't in the station anymore. He was inside the train. The subway had just departed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, scrolling through their phones, lost in their daily routines. Then, it happened. A deafening screech filled the air. The train lurched violently, throwing passengers forward. Sparks exploded from the ceiling. A loud boom echoed through the tunnels as the front car derailed, slamming into the concrete wall at full speed. The impact sent bodies flying like ragdolls. The metal walls crushed like paper, slicing through flesh and bone. The back cars piled up in a gruesome chain reaction. Fire erupted, glass shattered, blood painted the walls. Screams, so many screams. Then, Ayad gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was back on the platform. The train hadn't arrived yet. It was just a vision, or was it a warning? The panic begins. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He turned to the people around him. They had no idea what was coming. He had to stop it. "We have to get out of here," Ayad shouted. Heads turned. People frowned. "The train is going to crash. We need to leave." Laughter, eye rolls, a few muttered curses. But one person, Emily, a young woman with a red scarf, looked at him with concern. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Dead serious." Something in his face convinced her. Another man, David, also hesitated. "Dude, I've seen weird stuff like this before. I'm out." Ayad, Emily, David, and 3 others stepped away from the platform, just as the subway train arrived. The doors opened. People piled in. Then, the train departed. Ayad's pulse raced as he watched it disappear into the dark tunnel. 5 minutes later, a horrific explosion shook the ground beneath them. The emergency lights flickered. People screamed. Then, silence. The train had derailed, just as Ayad had foreseen. They had escaped, but their nightmare was far from over. Edeth's game begins. Days passed. At first, the survivors felt lucky. Then, one by one, they started dying. The first was David. He was at a construction site when a chain snapped, sending a metal beam plummeting down. It should have missed him, but at the last second, he tripped. The beam crushed his skull, splattering blood across the concrete. Next was Emily. She was blow-drying her hair when her cat knocked over a bottle of water onto exposed wires. A freak electrical surge shot through the bathroom, turning the water into a lethal conductor. Her body was found charred, her fingers melted to the sink. Then came Ryan. He worked at a bakery. One morning, while cleaning, he slipped on a wet floor. As he fell, his hand hit a switch, activating an industrial dough mixer. His scarf got caught in the machine. He screamed, but no one heard him over the sound of grinding metal. The machine pulled him in, his bones snapping, his body crushed into pulp. Alyssa was next. She was jogging in the park when a tree branch suddenly snapped. It should have just missed her. But a cyclist swerved, forcing her one step forward. The branch impaled her straight through the chest, pinning her to the ground like a lifeless doll. Nowhere to hide, Ayad knew his turn was coming. He barricaded himself in his apartment. No sharp objects, no electronics, no open windows. He thought he was safe, but death always finds a way. One night, the fire alarm blared. Smoke filled the air. The apartment next door was on fire. Ayad rushed to escape, but the elevator doors jammed. The stairwell was blocked by flames. As he gasped for air, the ceiling collapsed. A steel beam crashed down, slamming into him, crushing his body beyond recognition. Story 4. The Haunted Hotel. The Perfect Vacation. The Grand Horizon Hotel stood at the edge of a breathtaking cliff, overlooking the ocean. It was elegant, luxurious, and rumored to be haunted. But Ayad Khalil and his friends, Jake, Olivia, Mark, and Sophie, weren't worried about ghosts. They were here for the ultimate vacation, eager to enjoy the infinity pool, 5-star dining, and the legendary rooftop bar. "This place is insane," Olivia said, spinning around the massive lobby. "I heard people disappear here," Jake teased. "Ghost stories won't scare me," Mark laughed. As they checked in, Ayad suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced toward the elevator doors, where his reflection seemed distorted. Something felt wrong. He shook it off. They took the glass elevator to the 25th floor, the highest in the hotel. They had no idea that this trip would be their last. A vision of terror. That night, they headed to the rooftop bar. The view was breathtaking, but as Ayad sipped his drink, his head suddenly throbbed. His vision blurred, and then he was somewhere else. The hotel was on fire. Screams filled the air. People ran for the elevators, but the cables snapped, sending them plunging to their deaths. In the hallways, flaming chandeliers crashed down, crushing guests beneath them. Windows shattered, and people fell from the upper floors, their bodies hitting the ground like broken dolls. Then, the gas line exploded. The entire 25th floor erupted in flames, consuming everyone inside. And just before it all went dark, Ayad saw his own burned corpse in the reflection of a shattered mirror. Then, he was back at the rooftop bar. The fire hadn't started yet. It was just a vision, or a warning. Escaping fate. His heart pounded. "We have to leave, right now." His friends stared at him. "What? We just got here." Olivia frowned. "No, something bad is going to happen. We need to get out of this hotel." Jake laughed. "Come on, man, did you see a ghost?" But Ayad refused to stay. After a long argument, he managed to convince them to leave. They packed their bags and checked out of the hotel at 3 a.m. As they drove away, a massive explosion shook the ground. The Grand Horizon Hotel burst into flames, just like Ayad had seen. Fire engulfed the entire 25th floor. People screamed. Smoke filled the sky. The news later reported a gas leak that triggered a deadly explosion. Everyone on the upper floors had been burned alive or crushed in the collapse. Ayad and his friends had cheated death, but they didn't realize death doesn't like to be cheated. The death toll begins. A week later, Mark was the first to go. While cleaning his gutters, he slipped. He should have just landed in the bushes, but as he fell, a tree branch pierced through his throat, impaling him instantly. Next was Olivia. She was cooking dinner when the stove suddenly exploded. A loose gas pipe had leaked into her kitchen. The blast sent shards of glass and metal flying, slicing through her like knives. Her body was found burned beyond recognition. Jake died in an elevator. He was leaving work when the elevator doors malfunctioned. Halfway down, the cables snapped. The elevator plummeted 20 stories, crushing him into a pile of twisted flesh and broken bones. Sophie drowned in her own bathtub. She had just relaxed in the water, eyes closed. When suddenly the bathroom mirror fell, shattering over her head. Stunned, she slipped underwater, but a faulty drain suctioned her down, holding her there. By the time anyone found her, her lungs were filled with water. The final survivor. Ayad was the last one left. He locked himself in a small cabin far away from the city. No fire hazards, no elevators, no bathtubs. He thought he was safe, but death always finds a way. One night, a storm rolled in. Lightning struck a tree outside his cabin. The burning tree crashed through the roof, pinning him to the floor. Smoke filled the air. As he struggled to escape, the flames spread. Within minutes, the cabin was engulfed in fire, just like the hotel, and as Ayad took his last breath, his reflection in the window showed the burned corpse from his vision. Then, darkness. No one cheats death. Not for long. The roller coaster of death, a final destination, the ultimate thrill ride. The air was thick with excitement at Skyline Amusement Park. Screams of thrill-seekers filled the air as roller coasters twisted through the sky. The smell of cotton candy, popcorn, and hot asphalt mixed together under the scorching summer sun. Ayad Khalil and his friends, Mason, Lily, Brandon, and Zoe, had been waiting months for this trip. "Dude, we have to ride the hellbound coaster." Mason grinned, pointing at the newly opened roller coaster that towered over the park. It was the biggest and fastest ride ever built, featuring a beyond vertical drop, 5 loops, and speeds reaching 140 kilometers per hour. "It looks insane," Lily said nervously. "That's why we have to do it," Brandon laughed. The line was long, but finally they reached the front row. The safety bars locked in place. The ride began to move. Then, a vision of horror. Ayad blinked. And suddenly, he wasn't on the loading platform anymore. He was mid-ride. The roller coaster shot down the first drop, wind howling past them. Then, as they entered the second loop, Ayad heard a sickening snap. The track ahead had cracked open. Before he could scream, the front car derailed, flipping mid-air. Bodies flew from their seats. People slammed against the metal beams. One girl was decapitated by a snapping wire. Brandon's body was sliced in half by a jagged piece of metal. Mason's head smashed into a steel pillar, leaving a bloody stain as his lifeless body tumbled down. Zoe was flung 50 meters into the air, her body shattering on impact with the ground. Then, the entire coaster collapsed, sending flaming wreckage and broken bodies crashing into the crowd below. Screams, sirens, blood everywhere. Then, Ayad gasped. He was back at the loading platform. The ride hadn't started yet. It was just a vision. Or was it a warning? The escape. His heart raced. "We have to get off, now!" His friends stared at him. "What? We literally just got on," Mason groaned. "No, listen to me." Ayad's voice shook. "This ride is going to crash. We have to get off." The ride operator frowned. "Is there a problem?" Ayad unbuckled his safety bar and jumped out of his seat. Security rushed over, but his friends followed him, confused but spooked by his panic. They stepped away just as the ride took off without them. It climbed up the first drop. Then, just like in his vision, the track snapped. The front car derailed. Screams filled the air. Bodies flew, metal twisted, and within seconds, the ride was a mangled mess of fire, wreckage, and blood. Ayad and his friends stood frozen, watching the horror unfold. They had cheated death. But their nightmare was far from over. Death's revenge. A week later, Mason was the first to die. While working out at the gym, a cable snapped on the lat pull-down machine. The steel bar shot down, smashing his skull open. His brains splattered across the gym floor. Next was Lily. She was in her kitchen, cutting vegetables when she slipped. The knife plunged straight into her throat. She choked on her own blood, unable to scream. Brandon's death was brutal. He was walking past a construction site when a crane malfunctioned. A 4-ton steel beam fell from 50 meters up. His body was crushed instantly, his bones turning to dust under the impact. Zoe drowned in a freak accident. She was on a boat when she fell overboard. The motor's propeller sucked her in. Her body was torn to pieces, blood turning the water red. The last survivor, Ayad, was the only one left. He isolated himself, staying inside his home. No machines, no sharp objects, no open windows, but death always finds a way. One night, while walking down the stairs, he tripped. He reached for the railing, but it snapped. He fell head first, tumbling down all 20 steps. At the bottom, a sharp metal rod from a broken chair was waiting. It impaled his chest, piercing straight through his heart. His body twitched, then went still. Blood pooled around him. In his last moments, he saw a faint reflection in the window, his own lifeless corpse, just like in his vision. Then, darkness. No one cheats death. Not for long. If you enjoyed this terrifying story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because you never know when your time might be up.